Hey guys, welcome to part 2 of my rereading and close analysis of Cassandra Clare's Chain of Gold. Today I'm going to be focusing on chapters 4 to 6, including any flashbacks. Small disclaimer, this by no means is a book review. I'm not really going to be talking about the larger themes and plot points of the book. It's more going to be a close analysis of some of the references to the other books in the Shadowhunter universe and to other clues or tiny notes that I think are important or could be important for the rest of the Last Hours collection. Okay, so chapter 4 begins with the picnic and Cordelia arrives really early to the event. So she's sitting down waiting for her friends that she knows to come, and the first person that comes and greets her is Anna Lightwood. Cassie makes a point of Anna Lightwood's knee-high boots. And at this point, I'm just thinking, who else wears knee-high boots? Only her great-great descendant, Isabel. And I really appreciate things like this that show certain traits and characteristics through the different generations, particularly with people like Anna Lightwood and Isabel, who we know are such strong, badass women. And we already know that Isabel receives the ruby pendant that was once Camille's, bought for her by Magnus, and then passed to Will, and then to Cecily, and then Cecily gives it to Anna at the end of Every Exquisite Thing. But tiny things like the fact that both Isabel and Anna love to wear knee-high boots just makes me so happy, and I love to see character links like this through the different generations. I think Cassie does this really well through all her other books, but especially in Chain of Gold. So in the same conversation, Cordelia is showing Anna Cortana and explaining how awesome this sword is and how it's been through the Carstairs family for years. And she said that with Cortana, her father slew the great demon Yanlo. So the first time I read Chain of Gold, I didn't really pick up on the name of the demon because there are so many names of demons in these books and they go right over my head. But having just reread The Infernal Devices last month, I realised that Yanlo was the demon that kidnapped Jem and his family, tortured them, killed the parents and left Jem with his addiction to Yinfen. It just makes me so happy to read that it was Elias Carstairs that avenged the death of his brother and his brother's wife and his nephew. So if you watched my last video, you remember that I spoke about this tiny bit of gay panic when Ariadne is asked if she finds the Merry Thieves attractive, and she sort of mutters that she thinks they are because in reality she's too focused on Anna. And in this chapter, Down by the Lake, there's a similar moment involving Thomas. Cassie writes, "Ah," said Thomas in a slightly too casual voice, "Alistair's here." And this is it's just the same energy, the same gay panic and worry and making sure he looks okay because his crush or who he fancies is standing over there, but he needs to act like he's not bothered and he's so nonchalant. And I just love to see the parallels between characters. So pretty soon after everyone sat down, there's a mass demon attack on all the Shadowhunters and it just comes from nowhere and no one's expecting it. And there's this moment where James just reacts, and Cassie writes that a second later James was there and he flung himself at the creature on top of Barbara, knocking it to the side. They rolled over and over, the Shadowhunter and the demon, as screams tore through the crowd of assembled Shadowhunters. Again, there's this parallel to parent and child behaviour that I spoke about in the last video with Lucy and Tessa, but this time with Will and James. So the scene I'm thinking about is in The Infernal Devices at Benedict Lightwood's ball, and Will sees the demon Marbus, and this demon is the one that he's been looking for his whole life, the one that cursed him and told him he could never love anyone. He just runs over and he just tackles him, and they just roll and roll and roll. I was transported back to that scene. Okay, so the next thing we're going to focus on is a possible hint to Elias Carstairs in the later part of Chain of Gold that I didn't really pick up on. So in chapter 5, when they're returning in the carriage and Matthew is being typical Matthew and just swigging from his hip flask, and Cordelia notes the sweet perfume of alcohol, familiar as childhood. And then later on you realise that Elias is actually an alcoholic, and that is the reason why I can't remember this attack and why he doesn't have an alibi, because he was drunk. And I think little hints like this I just must have skimmed past and not read, and I think it's a nice little breadcrumb trail that Cassie leaves for readers to figure it out on their own, I know that I didn't figure it out. I don't know what I was thinking. I wasn't sure why Elias just couldn't remember what happened. But looking back now, it's obvious she was hinting that he does have a problem with alcohol. Okay, so what I'm next about to say might be a bit controversial because it involves that family tree. And so there's one branch of the family tree. I mean, the family tree in general confuses me, but this one branch confuses me the most, and that is the Christopher Lightwood married to Grace Cartwright branch. So after the aftermath of the demon attack, it's actually Christopher that takes Grace back in his carriage. So the line says, in the end, it had been Christopher, looking more frightened than he had during the demon battle, who had offered to take Grace back to Chiswick in his carriage. It's a strange pairing, but it could work. And there's a lot of hate for Grace out there, but I'm still holding on to the hope that she's going to redeem herself. So my next note's a kind of sad note. It's just sort of comparing the different generations and the different main characters of the book, as in the differences between the Infernal Devices gang and the Last Hours gang. There's this line that in this new generation and the inhabitants of the London Institute at the moment, so in the Institute, the music room was rarely used, so Lucy was not musical at all, and James had played the piano for a few years and then abandoned it. So my first thought was Jace being James's descendant, and how it doesn't matter if James can't play piano because further down the line there's going to be an amazing piano player in the Herondale family. And my second thought was just, oh, wait, the music room was kind of a big part of the Infernal Devices. Jem was always in there. I think Jem and Tessa had a really cute heart-to-heart in there. And it's just really sad to see that the music room's not being used anymore as much as it had before. It makes me sad because there's no music in the London Institute anymore, and no one's in the music room, and no one cares. I know they still keep Jem's violin for him, but it must just be so quiet. Right, let's talk about Bridget. Bridget is a mystery. She's a random entity that has survived for 100+ years. She's still kicking about in the dark artifices. Are you telling me that Will Herondale died, but Bridget is still alive? So Cassie references Bridget's greying red hair. I have so many issues with this because she's starting to turn grey in this book, which is, you know, the sign of old age. But Chain of Gold is set in 1903. And more than 110 years later, she's still kicking about. What colour is her hair now? Does she have hair? Has it gone? I just don't understand. If it's greying in 1903, what happened to it now? After chapter 5, there's a brief flashback to one of James's visits to the Blackthorn Manor to first see Grace. And there's this really nice moment when Cassie mentions that the Blackthorn motto, Lex Mala, Lex Nulla, which means a bad law is no law, has been so obscured by all these vines and briars that it now just says Lex Nulla, which obviously means no law or lawless. So if you think about the fact that Grace is possessing James through her bracelet, you could say that she was acting lawlessly. She was acting to cause harm. The whole idea that she's acting lawlessly, which is sort of foreshadowed in this moment, I think is a really great detail that I definitely didn't pick up the first time I read it. Also in this chapter, we find out a little bit more about Grace Blackthorn and her background. And she says that she's really grateful to the Blackthorns because without them, she wouldn't have a family, nor a mother, nor a family name. And again, my first thought was this family tree where she's called Grace Cartwright. Why would she go back to her original name if she was so grateful to the Blackthorns for giving her their name? Is it possible that Grace can escape Tatiana's manipulative clutches and redeem herself to an extent where she actually wants to take back her old Cartwright name and completely disregard the Blackthorn name? Or am I just reading into this too much and the family tree really doesn't mean anything? Jessie and Lucy. The first time I read Chain of Gold, I was too enamoured by James and Cordelia to really give much notice to Jessie and Lucy. But now, I think they're one of my favourite ships in the whole book. So this line where Lucy and Cordelia are breaking into Chiswick and Cordelia is downstairs distracting Grace and Lucy's just climbed the vines to break in. And Cassie says how the door flew open, showing a massive empty ballroom beyond. Well, nearly empty. Jesse Blackthorne stood in front of her, his green eyes blazing with rage. "What in Razel's name are you doing here?" he hissed. "Oh, Jesse, don't pretend you're not happy to see Lucy here." So while Lucy's upstairs flirting with Jesse, Cordelia sees something in the greenhouse and goes to investigate. She's looking around, she notices spider webs that hung shimmering like the lace of an abandoned wedding dress. Okay, I know this is just a description of the cobwebs and that it really isn't important, but 20 years ago, wasn't Tessa running around Chiswick in her wedding dress? Coincidentally, a wedding dress that she abandoned after Jem died. Connections everywhere. So as Lucy and Jesse are chatting about how Jesse died, Lucy notices a young man with pale blonde hair and a hard twist to his unforgiving mouth. It's how there was something familiar about him. Since you know that the only two people living in Chiswick are Tatiana and Grace, and also Jesse as a ghost, you know that this young man is dead. Literally right after, Jesse also asks Lucy, "How long have you been able to see the dead?" Which suggests that he's noticed her noticing this blonde man. First time I read it, I was probably like, oh, it's just a random ghost. But then I realised, is this ghost not Nate Gray, Tessa's brother, who is described as having this pale blonde hair and who was liaising with Benedict's all through the infernal devices? And there's a reason Lucy thinks there's something familiar about him, because he looks like her mother. By this point I was done. I was so annoyed that I hadn't seen this before. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to talk about today isn't necessarily a reference to any of the other Shadowhunter chronicles. It's just a really nice literary reference that I think Cassie has brought in and subverted. So earlier in this chapter, Cordelia asks Lucy if she's ever read any of the older versions of fairy tales, particularly Sleeping Beauty, and she mentions how Sleeping Beauty's palace was ringed all around with sharp briars. So obviously Blackthorn Manor in Idris is covered in these briars, and that's what James goes to cut down. Cassie also references the original retelling of Sleeping Beauty in the Dark Artifices. Emma and Julian are trying to get into the Unseelie Court, and Emma has to cut through all these vines and briars, and there's bodies inside. So apart from this whole idea that this Sleeping Beauty fairy tale is intrinsically connected to the Blackthorns, specifically Grace in Blackthorn Manor, which is covered in these briars, and then Emma and Julian more than a century later, I also think it's connected to Jesse in some way. So after Lucy hears Cordelia crying for help in the greenhouse, Cassie writes how she tumbled out onto the balcony without another look at Jesse and flung herself at the wall and began to climb down. So picture this. Jesse is Sleeping Beauty in this scenario, then he's sleeping between being dead and alive. And Lucy is the prince that rescues him. Not only does she climb up the briars to get into the house, also climbs back down them. In conclusion, Lucy is the badass prince that saves herself. And that's the tea. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I really hope you enjoyed my super over analysis and close reading of chapters 4 to 6. Remember to subscribe for more videos like this as I make my way through Chain of Gold for the second time in 3 months. And please, if you found any references yourself in chapters 4 to 6 of things that I've missed out on and you think could be important to the later books and also to the wider Shadowhunters universe, please let me know in a comment below.